Just wait a second till this intro is over. Well, praise Jesus, everybody. Thank you for joining me on The Lookout Guy. I'm Michael Tobin, and once again, thank you for visiting my vast arrays of social media platforms. Well, as promised, I have something that it took hours to put together. The title is COVID-19, Nature's Curse, Patient Zero Identified, and some bright sides. And it took me about 35 minutes to get this all situated. All the places that my podcast gets automatically migrated to directly from Spreaker.com. And it's all part of my subscription that I get. I get the bottom tier subscription, but not the free one. The free one is limited to 15 minutes. And I have the next one up, which has a 45-minute limit. And above that one, it goes to a 3-hour limit. And then you get a 5-hour limit. And the top one is like, you could broadcast 24 hours a day if you'd like. Wouldn't that be something? But anyhow, I'm on iHeartRadio, and I'll give you links to all this. Of course, Spreaker Podcast. I'm on Spotify. And on Spotify, you can create an account or just log in through Facebook to listen to podcasts. I'm on Google Podcasts, Deezer. I haven't even heard some of these. Deezer Podcasts, Podcast Addict. And, what did I write about that? Download Podcast Addict app to your PC or phone from your phone app store. And on both, just search Michael DT, the Lookout Guy. And I have the link for the PC, Windows or Mac. And if you want to download that to your phone, just go to your app store. And I'm on Podchaser. And I am on YouTube, but I don't provide a link on my descriptions because YouTube is pretty sadly mistaken in a whole bunch of ways. But when I have videos posted onto my podcast, onto my blog, all you need to do is just select the link to the video, and you can watch and subscribe to my channel that way if you like. But as it is, my podcast from Spreaker automatically migrates to YouTube as an audio, which is pretty neat. I mean, I'm still not ready to subscribe in any way to YouTube until there's a lot of legalities going on between some very big social media platforms, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter mainly. And after all that gets situated in the courts, then we'll see. So, the title of the show. I actually did a DuckDuckGo web search. I don't do all my web searches on Google. Google also is another one that's going through the courts through various different people suing them. So I actually did a DuckDuckGo web search, and I highly recommend DuckDuckGo on Psalm chapter 91, and it's currently the #1 chapter that pops down in the pop-up menu after the word Psalm is typed. And I found this. What is Psalm 91 all about? What are things that we can learn from it for today? Psalm 91 appears to be a psalm in the setting of warfare with threats of an imminent battle that is about to, has, or is currently taking place between soldiers that may be facing impossible odds. If the face of such a harsh reality as this, God is placed in the position of being the protecting parent of his young as their fortress, shield, and protector. And I actually have a link for that. But starting with Psalm 91, verses 1 through 3, God the Deliverer, which is very relevant to COVID-19 because most of us are just learning about viruses and flus and previous ones. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust, for he will deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the deadly pestilence. Amen to that. The pestilence in play is COVID-19. We've all heard of it by now. I've heard it called Z's disease, Kung flu, the China virus, the Wuhan virus, and another form of the group of viruses called Corona. It was recently officially named COVID-19, an acronym for coronavirus and disease. And the 19 represents the year in this 21st century, 2019, the year it was discovered. As mundane as it may seem, here are the statistics just from today. According to the Johns Hopkins University, globally, 657,000 plus cases, and globally 30,438 deaths just with the COVID-19. In the United States, total cases is 113 plus, and total deaths is 1,892. And I have a list here of previous related audio podcasts with the links that you could search. 5 of them, actually. I can't believe the first one that I did. I was like, I didn't even remember interviewing well, I remembered him, but I didn't realize that it wasn't such a long time ago. It seemed like longer. California COVID-19 orders explained. That's for March 21st, and I have another one and a video on YouTube. Dr. Fauci wipes his nose. Moments later, he rubs his hand all over on Mike Pence. That was like 7 days ago. Let's see what here. Supermarkets prepare for surge in demand. Global fatalities. That's March 1st. Markets reacting appropriate to COVID-19. That's February 29th. And coronavirus, Wuhan Christian plead for prayers with guest Eugene Bach. Yeah, he's pretty cool. Sorry about that. I had a couple of technical difficulties. I couldn't find out what was going on. The internet reception. So, going forward, we can thank Donald Trump and the whole Western world for leading the first modern attempt to do something all mankind has joked about for thousands of years. The proverbial cure the common cold. In this case, it is to treat one virus as if it is a terrorist organization. This is literally the most brilliant thing I have ever seen in my whole life, and possibly anyone who is alive, with the exception of World War II, as a debatable event to be considered the most brilliant event ever in defeating a genuine evil force. Donald Trump was the first in the world to ban travel after only 10 days of our official notification of the existence of this particular virus. The world followed. Further to the center, California is the first U.S. state to issue a statewide ordinance to heed a set of protocol towards slowing the spread of COVID-19 from person to person, and New York followed the very next day with theirs. We beat the nation to the draw, and Donald Trump beat the world to the draw. And everything thus far that has followed, and it is now world history. Every year in every region of the world since the flus and colds were in existence, mankind has literally been like sheep led to the slaughter on schedule. This is what it looks like to battle just one virus. If we're going to pray 2 Chronicles chapter 7 verse 14 and actually believe it, then this is what it looks like to do what God teaches us through his wisdom of real science. Every year, 650,000 humans die of the flu, and we do nothing to kill it. If we expect God to do an abracadabra and eradicate an annual epidemic, then we are fooling ourselves. If we can thank God for skillful doctors, then we can also thank God for skillful scientists and chemists and all who develop cures for sicknesses. Our bones don't put themselves back together when they are broken. And you'll have to excuse me while I'm talking. I'm spell checking things for my blog. I'm reading it from my blog before I actually publish my blog. And it's so much that I had to write it all down. So our bones don't put themselves back together when they're broken, right? It would be ludicrous to expect God to put a bone back together instead of having someone who learned about bones in order to make it happen for us. But instead of standing still until being literally led to death without a struggle every single year, this is what people who don't go down with a fight do. If part of the solution is self-isolation, quarantine, or whatever you want to call it, then self-isolation it is. It isn't communism, it isn't socialism, it isn't politics, it isn't conspiracy. It is plain sensibility and resolve to defeat something that is able to be defeated. So it takes cooperation. On that, I have 3 things. Number 1, Scientific Journal of Nature concludes that COVID-19 naturally evolved from an earlier natural virus, otherwise known as SARS-CoV, or just SARS. Did you hear that? Scientific Journal of Nature concludes that COVID-19 naturally evolved from an earlier natural virus. Number 2, patient 0 of COVID-19 may have actually been discovered. And number 3, what are some bright sides of times of incarceration, loneliness, persecution, and especially pestilence? Which is what this and other diseases are. It's pestilence. So, starting with number 1, scientists say the lack of COVID-19 conspiracy means we may be in more trouble than we think. In other words, we're in more trouble than we would have been. If this is true, we're in more trouble than we would have been had it been man-made. And I have a link to that also. Study clearly shows novel coronavirus was not made by human beings, by Andrew Magnotta. And it has his hashtag, it has his Twitter symbol at a radio station, 710 WOR, March 27th, yesterday. By the way, it's 11:21 p.m. Pacific time right now. So how is being a natural-made virus worse than a man-made virus? Here's from the article. I'll read a couple of paragraphs, and I also have it on my blog. I have it the whole article visible as well as the link. So from the article, a study of the virus genome published in the Scientific Journal of Nature Medicine finds otherwise. Our analysis clearly show that SARS-CoV-2 is not a laboratory construct or a purposefully manipulated virus. And that's what the study says. As its scientific name would suggest, the new coronavirus is a relative of another pandemic-inducing germ, SARS-CoV, and as we know it as SARS. And going down the article to the last paragraph, if lethal diseases like COVID-19 can develop secretly in animal species for generations before infecting humans, then there is the risk of future re-emergence events. Did you hear that? That answers the question pretty positively. The question, will it re-emerge? Now it's more towards yes. Then there is the risk of future re-emergence events. The ongoing surveillance of pneumonia in humans and other animals is clearly of utmost importance to preventing the next pandemic, the journal says. So on to number 2. Patient 0 could be a 57-year-old woman who sold live shrimp in the Wuhan market. Her name is Wei, W-E-I. She has recovered and believes she may have been infected from a market toilet that was shared with wild meat sellers. And that is Jarrett Staff. And that's yesterday. And it mentions 2 different hospitals by name. And it mentions doctors, but it doesn't mention the doctor's name. And if you select this link and you read this, if you read about this, I'm curious to whether one of the doctors mentioned is the doctor who discovered it, who happens to have been a Christian before he supposedly died of the COVID-19 virus. That would be interesting to find out. And number 3, how have people from biblical times and on into the 21st century made the best out of pestilence, prison, and persecution when it comes to writing, like masterpieces? This is the bright side of this podcast, and it's going along smoothly, in my honest opinion. And I'll tell you about my trip to the hospital today. After this, everything's good. The best masterpieces from biblical incarceration to COVID-19. I was reading how Paul the Apostle wrote his best writings while he was locked up. Also, so say that you're Marco Polo and you've just spent 15 years traveling a world few people have seen. Upon your return to Italy in the late 13th century, you discover that there's a war on between Venice and Genoa. You're captured and tossed to jail simply because you're a prominent Venetian. What do? You tell your story to your cellmate, of course, who happens to be a writer and who jots everything down in French and later publishes it. Debate rages as to how much imagination Polo added to his travels, but his stories remain an invaluable glimpse into a world erased by time. And I have the link for that. I actually read that book in 6th grade, The Travels of Marco Polo. It's an awesome book. And then, as mentioned above, the prison epistles, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon are so named because they were written by the Apostle Paul during one of his incarcerations. So they're named places in what is called Asia Minor. It is generally accepted that Paul wrote the prison epistles during his first Roman imprisonment. The exact dates he wrote each of the prison epistles is unknown, but the The 2-year period he spent under house arrest in Rome has been narrowed down to the years AD 60 to 62. Paul's imprisonment in Rome is verified by the book of Acts, where we find references to his being guarded by soldiers. In Acts chapter 28, verse 16, being permitted to receive visitors, chapter 28, verse 30, and having opportunities to share the gospel in chapter 28, verse 31. These details, along with Paul's mention of being with those who belong to Caesar's household in Philippians chapter 4, verse 22, support the view that Paul wrote the prison epistles from Rome. In other words, he wrote his epistles in prison. And now, us here in the United States are just now going through a whole bunch of topics and subjects and questions and suppositions that people in China, the former Soviet Union, of course Cuba, that they are experts in, because many of us are all bent out of shape because we're being forced to do our church services. Tomorrow, Sunday, will be week number 3 that all of the United States has been doing live stream church services with 10 or less people in the actual church building. If I'm not mistaken, from an English friend of mine across the pond in the UK, they've been doing it for 6 or 7 days, live streaming. I've got a real good friend over there doing live streams, and he's not even a pastor. He's a Christian contemporary musician since the 1970s, one of the founders. But his name is Paul Bolton. Look up Paul Bolton. Of course, Paul, Paul, and Poulton. He's got some of the best music I've ever heard. But Paul the Apostle's Roman incarceration produced 3 great letters to the churches of Ephesus, Colossae, and Philippi, as well as a personal letter to his friend Philemon. And I have the link for that. And then there's, get ready for this, I'm full of surprises, you guys. You got to listen from the beginning to the end. You'd be like, man, where does this guy get this stuff? It's like the Joker to Batman. Where does he get those toys? I get information, but you got to listen from the beginning to the end. Then there's a modern public figure today who I have spoken with personally over the phone and through email a few times, beginning around 1990, before email. I spoke to him on the phone. His name is Randall Terry, founder and first president of the Operation Rescue pro-life group. I have still yet to meet him in person, but I still consider him a friend. Look him up. Look up Randall Terry. RANDALLTERRY. He's still active today. So he wrote several books, and I have all of them. As he actually mailed them to me a few years ago. And at least one of them, I believe 2 of them, but at least one of them was when he was in jail. And it's titled, "Why Does a Nice Guy Like Me Keep Getting Thrown in Jail? How the Theological Escapism and Cultural Retreatism in the Church Have Led to America's Demise." And that's from 1993. So he was falsely imprisoned by the Wichita police, illegally using the RICO Act as a mechanism to imprison him for peacefully protesting abortion facilities. During the Wichita abortion protests during Bill Clinton's first presidential term in the early 1990s, Randall Terry was later released and his criminal record cleared. And finally, moi. I don't know how to spell moi. I even wrote a book when I was suddenly handed a bunch of time to gather all my most pertinent writings and ideas I have stored up in my memory over a period of 26 years then. My time was from losing my job of 7 years due to my employer losing a contract with a client. And I was forced to be on unemployment for 6 months because truthfully, I just didn't have it in me to do property maintenance anymore. 2 blocks from the beach, a Southern California beach. Imagine 2 blocks from a Southern California beach in a tourist city dealing with you know what. And I learned a lot of character, the 9 fruit of the Spirit. I had to go through the 9 fruit of the Spirit every day to the best of my ability. And I survived. But I ended up having to get on unemployment. But I digress. I wrote Making America Righteous Again, from Bitterness to a Delight. During my time unemployed, I searched high and low for several months for employment, but I also had the time to compile my book on Kindle's Amazon website and put together my book into e-form. And it was released on the very first day of 2016. And from then on, I had begun my many temporary and part-time jobs up until just a year ago, finally becoming permanent full-time in a job I currently have, a machine operation job for a top-tier, cutting-edge Italian company making all various kinds of the best salami you'll ever eat. But back to the books. While writing, the thought occurred to me to make an acronym for my book. The title, so it won't be a total pun on now President Trump's first campaign model. So I took the letters M-A-R and A from the beginning of the first 4 words in the book title, Making America Righteous Again, to form the acronym MARA. The acronym forms the female name. And I was just playing around with acronyms and I was just blown away. But it's also a word from the Bible meaning bitterness with Hebrew origins. And it's a lake in the wilderness from the book of Exodus. And it was named Mara because it was a bitter water. But God told Moses to throw a stick in the water. So Moses had thrown a stick in the water and the water became sweet. In the book of Ruth, Naomi told the people of Bethlehem, when they recognized who she was, to no longer call her Naomi, but to call her Mara, because God has dealt bitterly with her. But of course, Naomi never changed her name. She kept her name. And what does her name mean? It means beautiful or my delight. That, of course, is how we must be personally and as a nation. We need to change from bitterness to sweet again, from bitterness to a delight again. So there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of extremely classic and well-known works that so many writers, inventors, and adventurers, and all forms of public figures throughout the ages, written in times of incarceration, loneliness, famine, persecution, you name it. And finally, I've got 15 minutes left. This is going pretty good. And finally, right now, as I write, the latest 2 surprises of... See, this is why you gotta just listen and wait. This is the cherry on the cake. And finally, as I write, the latest 2 surprises of public celebrities who have released a major work in the United States and who is working on his next release. They are singer and songwriter Jackson Browne. You know that song, Running on Empty, and all kinds of other ones. He is producing some new music. Guess why? Because he has a very mild case of COVID-19. And guess what he's doing? I have the link to an article. Good article. Guess why he has a bunch of time, and guess what he's doing? He's self-isolating. What do they call it? 6 foot distance between people and all that stuff. But he has to self-isolate in his home as much as possible, of course. So he's got time. But he says he's got a mild, so let's pray for Jackson Browne. I know he's a secular singer, but he's brilliant. So we got Jackson Browne, and it's a good article too. I have it listed on my blog. So he's producing some new music because he has a mild case of COVID-19, and he just learned this week. And he says that he has plenty of time now because of California's and the United States' shelter-in-place regulations to flatten the curve. And he knows all the lingo. So you should read his interview. It's actually an interview. So to bring down the number and all that. And now, if you're still paying attention, Bob Dylan just released a song a couple of seconds shy of 17 minutes. It's a long song. At the stroke of midnight Wednesday morning, March 25th, 2020. So that was 3 days ago. Did you hear me? Did you hear that? Bob Dylan just released a 17-minute song. The song is titled Murder Most Foul. It's a song about the murder of former President John F. Kennedy. And I have a link to that article also. And it's actually on YouTube. The song is on YouTube. You can listen to the whole thing. And so I will just leave you at that and conclude that even now, due to a common cold, my boss actually told me to take Thursday and Friday off and the weekend. And it's now Saturday still. And that reminds me, I'll tell you about my doctor's visit today. So I actually have had 3 days now in home isolation that seems forever, to ponder a whole vast array of ideas, to podcast and or write about, which has been very rare these days, past couple of years of going from job to job, paying my bills and living, because I'm doing my due diligence to heed and honor the attempt for all to stay home right now. There's no way for this not to work if everyone does their best to do it. And by the way, there's 3 schools of processes that this whole shelter in place quarantine thing is